So, Queen Camilla is supposedly facing severe mental exhaustion and major depression, but the moment you look closely at the timeline, the entire story starts to fall apart. Because according to the reports, this alleged health crisis didn't begin after months of public pressure, it didn't slowly develop after years of media scrutiny. Instead, it supposedly began at almost the exact moment King Charles III made it clear that he was preparing to hand princess and major control over the royal family's private finances. And that timing raises one very uncomfortable question. Was this really a sudden health crisis, or was something else happening behind the palace walls? Because according to palace insiders, the timing was far too precise to ignore. And honestly, the fact that nobody inside the palace appears willing to directly answer the obvious questions only makes the whole situation even more mysterious. So before we get into everything that allegedly happened behind those palace doors, if you're new here, we break down royal drama as it unfolds, so make sure you subscribe to the Crown Tribal Watch, it genuinely helps more than you know. Now, here's where everything starts getting interesting. King Charles III had reportedly been planning a major change in the way the royal household handled its finances. And we're not talking about some minor adjustment. We're talking about the Privy Purse. The official financial system responsible for managing the monarch's private finances, living expenses, and the internal operating budget of the royal household. In other words, this isn't pocket change. This is one of the financial backbones of the institution. And whoever has significant control over those financial decisions can have enormous influence over how money moves throughout the royal household. According to the reports, King Charles wanted his younger sister, Princess Anne, to oversee it. And if you know anything about Princess Anne, the decision might sound logical. She's known for discipline. She's known for an extraordinary work ethic. She isn't exactly famous for wasting time. She doesn't seem interested in unnecessary drama. And she has built a reputation around simply getting the job done. She's the kind of royal who can reportedly attend several engagements in one day and still look as though she wishes there had been another one on the schedule. So when King Charles supposedly looked at the royal household and saw areas where spending could be reduced or made more efficient, Princess Anne appeared to be an obvious choice. But according to the allegations, there was a serious problem. The decision directly threatened Camilla's position. Because if Anne gained control over the purse strings, Camilla's influence over internal resources could potentially disappear. And this is where the story takes a very different direction. According to multiple reports, Camilla didn't simply disagree with the decision. She allegedly saw it as a direct threat to her position inside the monarchy. And then there was something else. Jealousy. King Charles trusts Anne completely. And according to the story, that trust isn't simply because she's his sister. It's because Anne has spent a lifetime proving herself reliable. She has consistently carried out royal duties. She has worked without constantly seeking attention. And she has built a reputation for being dependable. Camilla, meanwhile, has spent years establishing and protecting her own position within the royal family. So when she supposedly saw that level of trust being given to Anne, something allegedly changed. And this is where the timeline becomes extremely important. Because if Camilla was genuinely suffering from mental exhaustion caused by public pressure, you would normally expect the situation to develop gradually. You would expect signs to appear over time. You might expect changes during public engagements. You might expect people around her to notice that something wasn't right. But according to the reports surrounding this story, that's not what happened. Instead, her alleged deterioration supposedly appeared almost immediately after she learned about the king's financial plans. And that timing is what made people question the entire situation. Because according to the allegations, this wasn't simply a health problem. It was supposedly part of a much more calculated strategy. And this is where the story becomes even more serious. Camilla allegedly contacted a private physician in Chelsea. And according to the reports, she supposedly asked the doctor to prepare a medical dossier describing her as suffering from severe mental exhaustion and major depression. Not simply a vague statement saying she wasn't feeling well, but an official-looking medical report. A report that, if accepted by the king, could potentially make him reconsider his plans. Because imagine being King Charles. You're preparing to make a major financial decision. You're planning to place responsibility in the hands of someone you completely trust. And then your wife suddenly presents you with medical documentation suggesting that she's suffering from a serious mental health crisis. Of course that would make anyone stop and think. And according to the allegations, that was precisely the point. Now, it's important to understand what is being alleged here. The claim is that Camilla supposedly contacted the physician herself. That she allegedly asked him to create a file blaming her condition on relentless public pressure. And that she supposedly offered financial compensation in exchange for falsifying the diagnosis. If those allegations were true, this would go far beyond simply exaggerating symptoms. It would represent a deliberate attempt to influence the king by using his concern for his wife's health. And that's what makes the accusation so serious. Because once the alleged medical report was supposedly in her hands, Camilla reportedly began presenting herself to King Charles as exhausted and emotionally overwhelmed. A drawn face. Tired eyes. A visibly weary appearance. And then, according to the story, came the tears. She allegedly broke down in front of him. She pleaded with him to reconsider. And she reportedly framed her request as something that would actually help her recover. She supposedly told Charles that if he allowed her to control the Privy Purse instead of Anne, it would give her a sense of purpose. It would motivate her. It would give her something meaningful to focus on. And, according to the allegations, it would somehow help her heal. Think about that for a moment. She wasn't simply asking the king to delay the decision. She was allegedly asking him to reverse it completely. She wanted the authority that was reportedly being prepared for Anne. And she was using her alleged health condition as the reason why Charles should give it to her. That's what makes the situation so controversial. Because according to the story, the argument wasn't simply about health. It was about power. It was about influence. And it was about who would ultimately control the royal household's resources. And for a while, the strategy allegedly appeared to be working. King Charles reportedly began to hesitate. He saw his wife looking exhausted. He had a medical report in front of him. And suddenly, he was caught between two things. His responsibility to streamline the palace. And his instinct to protect his wife. That's an incredibly difficult position for anyone to be in. And according to the allegations, Camilla understood exactly how emotionally difficult that position was for him. But then came another alleged demand. And this is where the story becomes even more revealing. According to the reports, Camilla didn't stop with the Privy Purse. She allegedly demanded a written commitment from King Charles transferring the late Queen Elizabeth II's symbolic jewelry collections to her and to her children from her previous marriage. And that's a very different kind of request. These aren't ordinary pieces of jewelry. They're described as priceless objects connected to generations of royal history. Symbols associated with the monarchy itself. So why, according to the allegations, would such a request appear in the middle of a conversation supposedly centered around mental health and recovery? Why would someone who claimed to be struggling with severe exhaustion supposedly need a written pledge concerning jewelry and inheritance? And why would financial security for children from a previous marriage suddenly become part of the discussion? Those questions became central to the story. Because according to the allegations, these demands didn't look like the priorities of someone simply trying to recover. They looked like the priorities of someone trying to secure influence. Trying to secure assets. Trying to protect a position. And according to the story, Princess Anne began noticing that something wasn't right. And isn't known for overlooking details. She's observant. She's disciplined. And according to the reports, she began paying attention to Camilla's behavior. Especially the secret phone calls. Whenever King Charles reportedly left his study, Camilla allegedly picked up her phone. She would speak quietly. And according to the story, these calls happened repeatedly. There was a pattern. And what reportedly caught Anne's attention was the contrast between Camilla's public presentation and the behavior described during these private conversations. According to the allegations, she seemed too focused, too deliberate, too calculated. And then apparently wanted to know why. So, according to the report, she took a direct step. She allegedly placed a trusted servant on the palace cleaning staff assigned to Camilla's quarters. And that servant supposedly managed to photograph information from Camilla's phone. Call logs, messages, communication records. And according to the story, what Anne found appeared to confirm her suspicions. The same private physician in Chelsea. The same name associated with the alleged medical diagnosis. And the same number supposedly appearing repeatedly in Camilla's call history. At that point, according to the allegations, Anne didn't wait. She didn't quietly pass the information through another channel. She reportedly went directly to the doctor's clinic. And confronted him. This is where the story allegedly moved from suspicion to confirmation. According to the reports, the doctor initially defended his work. He reportedly claimed that the diagnosis had been prepared according to proper medical procedures. But then Anne allegedly showed him the call records, the messages, and the communication between him and Camilla. And according to the story, his position suddenly changed. He allegedly admitted that Camilla had contacted him. That she had supposedly offered financial compensation. And that the diagnosis had allegedly been fabricated. The reports further claimed that there were no genuine medical indicators supporting the claims of severe mental exhaustion or depression. If true, that would completely change the situation. Because Anne would no longer have just suspicion. She would supposedly have evidence. Call records, messages, a doctor's testimony, and an alleged admission. According to the story, and then took everything directly to King Charles. And imagine what that moment would have been like. Charles had supposedly spent weeks worrying about his wife's health. He had reportedly been reconsidering a major financial decision because he wanted to support her. And then his sister walks into his study. And places a dossier in front of him. A dossier allegedly showing that the entire situation had been staged. That's not simply disappointing. That's humiliating. According to the reports, Anne laid everything out. The alleged fabricated medical indicators. The secret communications. The financial arrangement. And the claim that Camilla's exhausted appearance had supposedly been part of a coordinated performance designed to manipulate Charles's compassion. Then Anne allegedly connected everything to the bigger objective. Camilla supposedly didn't want recovery. She allegedly wanted control. She wanted the Privy Purse. She wanted the jewelry. She wanted to secure her position. And she wanted to protect her children's inheritance. According to the allegations, the health crisis had simply been the tool used to achieve those goals. King Charles reportedly sat in silence. He was shocked. And then, according to the story, he made a decision that changed everything. He reportedly convened an emergency meeting of the Royal Council. Not a private conversation. Not a quiet family discussion. An emergency meeting with key members of the council present. And according to the reports, Anne brought the doctor into the meeting as a witness. The doctor allegedly stood before the council and confessed everything. He reportedly explained how the medical indicators had been fabricated. He described how Camilla had allegedly directed the process. And he confirmed the alleged financial arrangement. And with that testimony, according to the story, the entire plan collapsed. There was supposedly nowhere left to hide. No easy explanation. No simple way to dismiss the evidence. Everything was sitting on the table. And then King Charles reportedly delivered his judgment. According to the allegations, he revoked previous considerations regarding Camilla's authority. She was supposedly stripped of control over resources, budgets, and internal affairs. The The reports claim that she lost privileges connected to royal finances and inheritance. But Charles allegedly didn't stop there. According to the story, he ordered Camilla to leave Buckingham Palace immediately. That night. And that is where the story reaches its most dramatic point. Because this wasn't described as a temporary separation. It wasn't presented as a cooling-off period. It was described as an immediate removal. The guards were allegedly instructed to enforce the order without delay. And according to the reports, Camilla was forced to pack her belongings. Quietly. While rain poured down outside. No grand farewell. No opportunity to change Charles's mind. No apparent way to reverse what had just happened. The image described in the reports is almost cinematic. Camilla allegedly stepped out into the courtyard as the rain intensified. Her tears mixing with the rain. Her voice breaking as she cried out to Charles. Asking how he could treat her that way after nearly half a lifetime together. But here's where the story becomes even more striking. Because according to the allegations, she wasn't simply asking why Charles was being cruel. She was asking why her plan had failed. Why she had lost everything in a single night. And that's a very different question. Because when you compare what she allegedly claimed with what supposedly happened, the contradiction becomes impossible to ignore. She claimed she was suffering from mental exhaustion caused by public pressure. But the allegations say she was coordinating with a doctor to fabricate that diagnosis. She claimed she wanted to recover. Yet her alleged demands involved money, jewelry, and inheritance. She claimed she was too weak to handle the pressure. But according to the story, she was supposedly capable of organizing a multi-step campaign designed to influence the king. That's why the accusation becomes so serious. Because if the allegations were true, this wouldn't simply be about a health crisis. It would be about using empathy as leverage. It would be about taking someone's compassion and turning it into a weapon. And that is perhaps the most disturbing part of the entire story. King Charles was supposedly trying to protect his wife. And according to the allegations, that very instinct was what made him vulnerable to the plan. But Princess Anne didn't ignore what she saw. She could have remained silent. She could have allowed the situation to continue. She could have simply stayed out of it. But according to the story, she didn't. She noticed the details. The secret calls. The timing. The inconsistencies. The difference between the public image and the alleged private behavior. And those details are what supposedly uncovered everything. So what is the deeper lesson behind this dramatic story? According to the narrative, it's actually very simple. Transparency matters. Not only inside institutions, but inside relationships as well. When someone asks for power while pointing to their own suffering, questions naturally follow. Is the suffering genuine? Or is it being used as leverage? And when someone avoids direct questions, when they deflect, when emotions appear at precisely convenient moments, that isn't automatically proof of vulnerability. Sometimes, according to the story, it can be part of a strategy. The reports claim Camilla stood outside the gates of Buckingham Palace as they closed behind her. The rain was still falling. And according to the allegations, she had lost everything she had supposedly been fighting for. Her position. Her access to finances. Her influence. And the jewelry and inheritance arrangements she had allegedly demanded. And perhaps the most painful part of the story, according to the allegations, is that she brought the entire situation upon herself. She allegedly hired the doctor. She supposedly staged the illness. She allegedly pushed for more and more control. Until eventually, the entire plan collapsed under its own weight. And now comes the question that may matter more than everything else. Can King Charles ever trust her again? Because once trust is broken, especially under circumstances this serious, rebuilding it isn't easy. And according to the reports, Charles's decision to allegedly expel her immediately suggests that he didn't believe he needed more time. He didn't reportedly need another conversation. He didn't need another explanation. He saw the evidence. And he acted. But the consequences of this alleged confrontation could extend far beyond Charles and Camilla. Because according to the story, this wasn't simply a personal betrayal. It was supposedly an attempt to redirect royal resources and symbolic assets away from the institution and toward private interests. And that touches something much larger. The boundary between the crown and the individual has been carefully protected for generations. The monarchy depends on maintaining that distinction. Because when personal interests and institutional resources become blurred, the entire system can be placed under pressure. And according to the narrative, that's exactly why the palace reacted so strongly. The council supposedly didn't hesitate. And the king allegedly didn't hesitate either. Because this wasn't simply about whether Camilla was a good wife. It wasn't simply about whether she had supported Charles. It was about whether the monarchy could allow itself to be manipulated from within. And according to the story, the answer was no. Now, there are still plenty of questions surrounding what supposedly happens next. Will Camilla retreat quietly to a private residence? Will she attempt to push back through her own connections? Will her children from her previous marriage challenge the alleged revocation of inheritance promises? And will the palace ever release an official statement about the separation? Or will the silence itself become the answer? Those questions remain. But according to this story, the central point is much simpler. The alleged plan failed. The alleged manipulation was exposed. And the person who supposedly uncovered it was the one person Camilla may never have expected to be watching. Princess N. The sister who doesn't constantly seek attention. The royal who doesn't chase headlines. The person who simply gets on with the work. And according to the story, notices when something doesn't add up. That's the real focus of this narrative. Not simply the alleged downfall of a queen consort. But the quiet determination of a princess who, according to the reports, believed that loyalty to the crown meant protecting it from everyone. Even the people standing inside the palace walls. So yes. The story is dramatic. The allegations are serious. And the questions surrounding the timeline are impossible to ignore. But the lesson presented by this entire story is remarkably simple. If you have to fake a breakdown to get what you want, then perhaps you shouldn't have it in the first place. And if you're going to try to manipulate someone, maybe don't do it in front of Princess N. Because according to this story, she will notice. She will investigate. And she will bring the receipts. Thanks for watching. And we'll see you in the next one.